Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I see people coming in, which is amazing. Please come in and sit down. Welcome to this session on the civil society's role in the Global Shield against climate risk. My name is Magdalena Mirwald. I'm a project manager at the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative. Oh, it's very loud. All right. At the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative, which is hosted at United Nations University. And it's really my pleasure to have you here today and to discuss what civil society can and should contribute to the Global Shield against climate risks. I have great panelists with me today, but I hope that we keep our intervention short to half an hour so we can afterwards have a half an hour conversation, discussions, questions and answers. Today I have here Kairos de la Cruz. He is the Executive Director of ICS, the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities in the Philippines. Then I also have Joy Das. He is the Deputy Director of the Humanitarian and Climate Action Program at CARE Bangladesh. Then I have here Jennifer Phillips. She's an advisor at the Global Shield Secretariat. Hello, Jennifer. And then I have here Avena Samoa. She's an advisor at the Ministry of Finance, Ghana. Hi, Avena. And here, thank you very much to Ghana and the V20 for hosting this event in their pavilion. I want to start off very quickly by giving the rationale for this event. It's not working in a second. Yes, right. So we have this event in the context of a project which is called Multi-Actor Partnership for Disaster Risk Finance. And disaster risk finance can be many things, right? So it can be parametric insurance, risk pool, adaptive social protection, many different products. And what they have in common is that for civil society, often they are quite complicated and complex and not an issue they engage themselves with. Because if you hear disaster risk finance and insurance, what you think is this is for the government to deal with this together with the private sector because you hear insurance and usually you don't like insurance. But what we think and what we firmly believe is that this is a matter for the whole of society, right? Because disaster risk finance and insurance is essentially questions who owns risk from climate change, who has to pay for these risks, and who takes these decisions on who has to pay for climate change. So actually everybody in the society should be involved and should be at the table. And we have this project, it's in 6 countries and the Caribbean as a region. And in the context of the project, we engaged the 4 different sectors together. But now, while we were having the project, the Global Shield was founded, and we're very happy to engage with the Global Shield and also push for this multi-actor approach in the Global Shield. So now, without much further ado, I would want to hand over to Jennifer. Jennifer is from the Global Shield Secretariat, and she will quickly show us where the civil society can engage with the Global Shield against climate risk. So Jennifer, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Magdalena, for that introduction, as well as for inviting us to participate in today's session. I hope everyone can hear me okay. And so really quick, I'll start off giving a brief overview of what the Global Shield is and how it works, and how we would like to involve civil society organizations throughout the Global Shield process. And so I'll start providing a quick background about why the Global Shield was created. So we know a lot of countries face very big natural hazards that affect their economies and the livelihoods of individuals very frequently. And we know that it's very difficult sometimes to access the financing that's needed to both prepare and respond and recover to these different events. The process for acquiring this financing is very time intensive, it's often very expensive. And this, of course, exacerbates the effects of these natural hazards and catastrophes. We know that there's a lot of different organizations and private sector companies that are involved in these activities. And so with the Global Shield, what we wanted to do is bring together different actors to create a more coordinated approach. We know governments have a lot of different options when it comes to which types of financial instruments are available to them. And we wanted to be able to work together with them to identify which instruments are most appropriate for their different types of hazards, and to bring all of these different stakeholders that are involved in creating and developing these different products together so that countries could have a more clearer overview of what's available, what the advantages and disadvantages of these different types of solutions are, and to prioritize what their biggest needs are. And so the way we do this is that we bring together all of these different stakeholders to take part in an in-country process. I'll go through this on the next slide. And through this process, there's also a lot of opportunities for the civil society organizations to get involved. We know that if we really want these financial instruments to reach the most vulnerable, we're going to need the involvement of CSOs in order to bring these perspectives into the discussions and identify what are the biggest needs, what instruments do people already have access to, what are the barriers that are keeping them from using these instruments, what type of instruments could be helpful to them, and to bring this perspective and voice into the in-country process so that when the country develops their request for support, that these perspectives are at the forefront of deciding on where the biggest needs and gaps are. And so basically how it works with the Global Shield is when we start in a country, we work together with the ministries of finance and economies, as well as other highly relevant ministries like ministries of environment and climate change, as well as all of the other relevant stakeholders, including private sector actors, different organizations, and especially the civil society organizations, to first understand what are the risks that the country is facing and how are they affecting people's lives. So we know as we get into a different country, each region of the country is affected by different types of risk. We don't want to concentrate only on what the biggest ones are that might be affecting the capital or what might be affecting the biggest agricultural crop grown in the country, but also to understand what's happening in the lesser populated areas of the country. How are women being affected especially? Are they able to use different types of financial instruments? What about the youth in the country? What about the elderly? There's so many different vulnerable groups within a country that all might face their specific challenges when it comes to what's available to them to manage droughts, flooding, cyclones, and these different types of events. That is only through cooperation with the civil society organizations that we can bring in these perspectives into the process. And so what we do is we normally have a kickoff workshop in the country where we start inviting these different stakeholders to get involved and to also start contributing to our stock take in the country to see what programs are already being done by different civil society organizations and implementing agency. What's already been really great progress that should be scaled up by the Global Shield? How can we provide support, and how can civil society organizations help with ensuring that anything that's developed really reaches the most vulnerable groups? We know often with financial instruments, they're distributed through cooperatives, but there's many people that are not members of cooperatives, and there's often barriers for them to join cooperatives depending on the regulations and laws in the country, depending on if you need land ownership, depending on if you're somebody that works normally from home and just don't have access to those types of networks. All of these things need to be considered when thinking about what type of instrument should be developed and how do we distribute and facilitate these instruments so that everyone can get involved. We then also, through the Global Shield process, create a gap analysis to see what's missing in the country. And so we might know that there's credit available for members of cooperatives of certain groups. But we might also, through the help of the civil society organizations, identify which groups do not have access to these credits, which groups do not have any access or any type of insurance, which ones are most heavily being impacted by flooding in coastal regions or landslides in the mountainous regions of the countries. And so we also invite civil society organizations to bring these perspectives into the process so that when the government reviews what's happening in the country, that they can then think about how do they support these most vulnerable groups through instruments, and what distribution channels need to be developed, and who do they need to work with in the country, including the CSOs, in order to ensure that any type of financing that's delivered through the Global Shield is actually reaching the most vulnerable. This is a big motivation behind the Global Shield because we know that there's a lot of instruments being developed, but we also know a lot of the most vulnerable groups don't see the financing that's facilitated through different mechanisms, right? You have to find transparent and clear and efficient ways to actually get financing that's being distributed either through organizations or companies or governments to the actual most vulnerable groups and to have a way to target them. And this is why we really want to build this close cooperation with the Global Shield. And so as part of this process, we also work closely together with different organizations to identify the needs. We have a coordination hub where we bring together different major stakeholders that work on developing these instruments, including the regional development banks, the regional risk pools, different implementing agencies. But here we also have a seat representing civil society organizations. And here we would really like to hear from you about what needs to be considered when thinking about the type of solution that should be developed to the country, in the country. In addition, the Global Shield is run by a board that's made up of country member states. Here, we also have an observer seat for CSOs, because for us, it's very important to always hear also the critiques from the civil society organization about what we could be doing to improve and what we could be doing to improve how we're working so that we actually are helping and reaching the most vulnerable groups in society. And so with that, I'll finish up there and pass over to Magdalena, but very happy to discuss further and very happy to everyone who is attending today and is interested in getting involved.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. We actually have another slide which you're happy to scan. Jennifer, can you quickly say something about the Global Shield country communities?
Great. Yeah, thank you, Magdalena, for this. So basically, when we start working in a country, what we want to do is make sure we have an easy and efficient way to reach everyone who's interested in getting involved. And that's why we've created the Global Shield country communities, so that when we kick off in Senegal or Philippines, that if you're interested in hearing about what's happening in the process and sharing information for the stock take and the gap analysis, that you can join the community, and then we'll be reached out to by the Global Shield Secretariat to participate in these processes. And so this is the venue in which you can raise your voices and say, hey, this is what's happening in the country. These are the groups that are being greatly affected. This is what needs to be considered when thinking about what should be developed. And so if you're interested, please sign up here. It's no requirement to be actively involved. You can also join if you're just interested in hearing what's happening. But if you do want to become more actively involved, this is the mechanism to do so.
Thank you very much. So basically, Jennifer, there is the Global Shield board where there's an observer seat. There's the coordination hub where the main players in the CDRFI world come together and align. There is also a civil society seat there. And then in the in-country process, which is really at the heart of the Global Shield, we have the Global Shield country communities where the civil society and other non-state stakeholders could take part in the stock take, so seeing what's already there in the country and also point out their main priority gaps for the government to consider in their request. The Global Shield country communities, you can sign up at the website at this link. At the moment, these are the Pathfinder countries for which you could select to receive information, right? So some of them are also from our project, but some of them are not. The Pacific is a region. So feel free to go to this website, click at the link so you're informed when something is happening in the countries. So the concept of the Global Shield is inclusive, but now we still have to put it into practice, right? And now I would like to hand over to Kairos. Kairos, you can share with us your expectations from the Philippines, which is also a Pathfinder country, towards how you want to see you and your colleagues be involved in the whole process.
Thank you, Magdalena, and good afternoon again to everyone. I hope you can hear me fine. Again, I'm Angelo Kairos Torres de la Cruz. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities. Yeah, so we've been engaged in the map process for quite a while now, but we've been engaged in adaptation finance for the past 12 years. We've been working particularly around the People's Survival Fund. It's the only legislated national adaptation fund in the country, in the Philippines. And we started doing that work particularly because we have to ask, I mean, why do we have to align finance to support resilience? And I think you've been more or less familiar with the stark reality that V20 members, such as the Philippines, have a huge financial protection gap. And these are the same countries who have to bear a huge amount of the brunt of climate impacts. Of course, in terms of equity, it's the same countries that most probably are contributing less than 1% in the reason why we're having accelerated climate change in the globe. So for the Philippines, for example, financial protection is only around 5 to 10%. And usually it's concentrated on sectors that are already doing well enough. We still have a huge problem in terms of inclusion, in terms of making sure that our informal sectors, those who have zero access to proper documentation, actually gets protection afterwards. And I think it's not unique in the Philippines, especially, I mean, it's a sad reality, but I think it's quite common across a lot of developing countries and least developing countries. Next slide, please. Yeah, so every time we talk about multi-actor partnership and climate and disaster risk finance and insurance in the Philippines, everyone would say, yes, we want to be part of it. Yes, we need insurance. But we also have to recognize that willingness does not automatically translate to having the capacity to do so. Like, I can wish every day that our farmers have insurance coverage, but if we don't provide the right platform, the opportunities for them to participate in the process, it's not gonna happen. And it's a reality that I think have been long playing in a vulnerable country such as the Philippines. A few days ago, one of our local executives in this very same room during the Rewrite COP side event shared a very grim example. They're one of the very few local governments in the Philippines who are actually able to access the People's Survival Fund. And all it took is one Category 5 typhoon out of the blue, out of season, hitting their island and literally wiping out the whole investment of what's supposed to be an adaptation-funded, adaptation-specific intervention in the Philippines. And the damage in that particular municipality has been accounted to be between 90 to 95% of the total intervention. Other successful People Survival Fund proposals have also requested for replenishment or additional financial support because their climate models are basically underestimated the amount of damage that they would incur. And we've seen this happening not only in the Philippines, but across many developing countries as well. As I've said, there's a growing awareness of the importance of climate and disaster risk finance and insurance in the Philippines. However, we are also operating on a highly bureaucratic, on a highly archaic system of insurance. So right now, for example, our government, and they're doing a lot of, we have a lot of brilliant people trying to change the status quo. But up to today, climate and disaster risk finance insurance in the Philippines, if it's government supported, it's either very specific to a 100% subsidized agriculture insurance. 100% subsidy would only mean it can only accommodate so much. I think less than 20% of our total farmer population. Or you can avail an insurance called Fire Plus. Because the current system, the current policies can only cover fire insurance for government buildings. Meaning if you want to add on climate risk, it's the plus, which make things complicated for a lot of local governments because they are also afraid that they might get audited afterwards because the systems are not yet in place. And of course, we want to accelerate that. As I've said, we have a lot of government officials trying to change that status quo, but it's gonna take a while. We're hoping that being part of the Pathfinder countries under the Global Shield, we can actually incentivize the hardworking people who want to change the status quo. Because finally, you can make a connection directly going beyond your national budgets and tapping into something bigger, hopefully through the Global Shield. Resources such as access to data, education, awareness campaigns, predictable and accountable finance, those things are good to have. But even if the Philippines have a lot of policies on disaster management, disaster risk management, even if the Philippines has a standing climate change act, even if we have a adaptation specific fund, we're still grasping at straws at this point. We need to make the connection. And I think CDRFI, next slide please, and I think an effective CDRFI can only work if you have a healthy level of disruption. And usually the disruption would come from civil society organizations and the academe. ICSC, as I've said, we are not an insurance, specific. It's not part of our core work, but we do really well in terms of policy spaces. We fight for spaces, and we keep on urging a lot of civil society organizations that since the space, especially in the Global Shield, which I think is a generous space, if it's present, if it's there, it's our obligation as well to fill that space. Fill it with local experiences, try to give back to the rest of the world what we are learning from the Philippines, and hopefully in the process we learn something back from the rest of the Pathfinder countries as well. And this is my last slide, but for example, through the multi-actor partnership work, the Philippine Congress, which is, I think, around 270 plus legislators in the Philippines, recently adopted recently adopted a House resolution particularly supporting the establishment of a multi-actor partnership on CDRFI in the country, which means it gives an opening as well to national agencies to go beyond their mandates and start talking about CDRFI in a more holistic manner. And we're happy that, for example, the leadership of our Department of Finance is really shining through, and I think things would get better really soon. But the resolution, and it started with a conversation among civil society organizations in the Philippines, with our to the convening of the multi-actor partnership project. Everything started from a single conversation. But then we saw the opportunity, we took it, and as I've said, since the space is there, particularly given that the Philippines is a pathfinder country, it's our duty to fill that space. And hopefully next year we'll have better examples from the Philippines in a similar side event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kairos. So we see good news from the Philippines. There is some space. It was taken. The resolution has been passed. So if there is space, also a call to the civil society organizations here. If there's space, take it. If there's no space, make it. But at the same time, from Kairos, you said willingness is not the same as capacity. So here we already have the first call to maybe also the Global Shield Secretariat. If we want to involve the civil society organizations, it is a very technical space and it is quite specific. So in many countries, especially where there is not a multi-actor partnership, there might not be the capacities in the civil society level to just call them and say, hey, come come contribute to this workshop with the insurance private sector, because they're not going to be talking eye to eye. So there must be ideally some capacity building also involved if we want to really have a meaningful engagement in the Global Shield, not just a pro forma engagement. Thank you, Kairos. I hand over to Joy. Joy, you're from Bangladesh. Bangladesh is also a Pathfinder country, hopefully gonna take up the work anytime soon. So adding on what Kairos said, what are your expectations towards Global Shield?
Thanks, Magdalena. And well, Bangladesh is new to the MAP process. we have just started the process like 4 or 5 months back. So, of course, I cannot share the experience like Kairos, but I can share the expectation. Because since we have started, we have engaged with civil society, and we are basically working at the subnational level with a local CBO, of course. And in the discussions, one of a very famous regional journalists, he raised questions about the future. He said that we have heard a lot of these discussions, and this doesn't come or doesn't bring anything concrete to the community. And he says that these discussions are usually confined to this, a hall room, and this doesn't go to the policymakers. It doesn't go beyond Bangladesh or doesn't bring anything to the people. And of course, he brought some examples from some established fund. I won't name the funds. Of course, people do not have much of a good experience. But I promised him and the audience that this will go beyond the district. It will pass the mighty Podda River, which is a 6-kilometer wide river. Now there is a bridge, so we can cross faster, of course. And to the government, and I'll say that it will go to the COP, to the possible all global funding opportunities, including Global Shield, and you will see actions in reality. And of course, we will be directly engaged with them in the next 3 years or more, because we are anyway working in Bangladesh. So we have a promise already made to the people. So now our task is to make it real. So in terms of the asks, if you translate their things, they want funds which can reach people faster than usual bureaucratic process. They, they kind of have some kind of reservations in Bangladesh about climate insurance, which is natural, because people have a kind of a feeling that we are not responsible for climate change. Why do we pay the premium? However, there is this scope and there is distraction from the government, private sector, as well as community, because in the community there are different level in terms of financial capacity. There are different level of people, and their ask is different. And that is why, as you are telling, we need different instruments, because the instruments could be, could be focused to particular community, particular district, particular hazard, as you said, and there is no single solution, right? And of course, from that perspective, Bangladesh, and I can also talk about the neighboring countries, that we need instruments which should be proper, and even if it is insurance, it can be also make proper. It can be make gender sensitive. There is scope to make it attractive to the people. So it's about the instruments, it's about the product we are offering. And of course, however, we emphasize that most of the Global Shield Fund be channeled through the CVF B20 Multi-Donor Trust Fund, because, there is a huge gap in adaptation fund. And this must not be doubled or, double counted as adaptation fund. It should be new fund. And especially, when you talk about the need of, or the gap of fund in Bangladesh, in 2013 or 2014, the adaptation budget was 1.5 billion per year. Now it is 3.5 billion per year. And of course, there is still gap. So it's almost 2.5 times than before. So you understand the gap, and when there is more gap, there is more risk, right? And there is more need of multiple instruments. And however, since we are good at risk reduction, the NGOs, right? And we have done that for years, 20 years, 25 years. So that's kind of a known territory for us, finance for risk reduction. But when you talk about disaster risk financing, when a risk has already been materialized, and to compensate people and how to compensate people, that's kind of a new thing for the whole world, and that is why it has been discussed in the last 5, 6 years or so, not before that. So there is a long way to go and lot to do. And I can, like you said, next year when we are in COP, we can share more from the MAP experience in Bangladesh, and hopefully we can also be involved with the government for the in-country process. And I see a lot of opportunity because, when you talk about Bangladesh, it's one of the most vulnerable countries, but it is also one of the countries of opportunities. Bangladesh itself is thinking about a national mechanism for loss and damage within its capacity. And there are different instruments within the government mechanism, for example, the social safety net, which can be a great avenue to support that mechanism. And this can be an avenue for Global Shield as well to further strengthen that mechanism and make it more shock responsive. So, I mean, but I think from those perspective, Bangladesh is going to be a very challenging and at the same time learning experience for the MAP process. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. So you were saying, okay, before I was saying that we need to build capacities, right? But just talking is also not enough, right? So if we talk, people will ask, so where are my funds, right? So where is the result? So this is where the Global Shield comes in. If we build the capacities on disaster risk finance, and if we bring them to the workshops, to the stock take, we also need to show something later. So first of all, of course, we need a result that's tangible, and we also need this to communicate to all of the participants, also to follow up, to keep them involved. So we don't just also steal the time of people to contribute to stock take gap analysis and show something that actually works for them. You also said that the local level really needs funds at their level. So in the Global Shield, we can consider and also push for funds and projects in different levels. And that it's important to also link disaster risk finance to disaster risk reduction to actually keep also the risks transferable. So also linking the Global Shield to other processes like also, well, in the loss and damage space would be loss and damage fund in the Santiago network, but maybe also considering reaching out to the adaptation and the disaster risk reduction processes to find a more aligned approach to disaster risk finance and disaster risk reduction. Great, thank you so much. Abena, Ghana has just concluded the first in-country process, right? So you were from the Pathfinders, the Pathfinder, where everything was the first. Tell us about your experience. How did you manage the in-country process, and also how did you try and engage with the non-stake stakeholders?
Thanks, Magda. So Ghana started the in-country process in July 2023 with the Global Shield, but also with the Global Risk Modeling Alliance. So we began with the gap analysis, and we sought to go with, the areas that impact our economy more, which means we went towards agriculture, which is a dominant sector in the economy. And then we also looked at, in terms of disasters that we are used to encountering, urban flooding, and then also coastal erosion, which is another issue that we're dealing with. And we engaged the government agencies, and then we also engaged the CSOs. We had CASA, which is an association of CSOs, and then we had Hats Off. And I don't think I need to go much further into the in-country process because Jennifer did a very thorough job explaining the process. And I think between Kairos and Bangladesh, making clear what the financial protection gap is. But I think the way we view the CSOs is that they are more or less a connection to the communities. The best way to go with the bottoms-up approach. So recognizing that, the Ghanaian population isn't very keen on insurance, trigger-based, pre-arranged financing. I do believe that some of it comes from the issue of affordability, which is why it's great to start with the Global Shield, because we start with getting some premium support to enable us actually implement these programs. And then when communities see the benefits that exist, then the incentive is there for farmers and for people at the local level to actually want to be part of prearranged and trigger-based funding. So we see CSOs as allies in our, in our ability to actually do this, because when the results are clear and given the kind of relationships that they have at the community level, then in terms of communication with the communities, it becomes easier to convince individuals to be responsible for their own financial resilience. So that's one of the ways we see CSOs. We have just submitted our request to the Global Shield, but we do not think of this as the end. We recognize that the process of the gap analysis has to continue. We need to understand where there are further gaps and then work towards, building collectively solutions to deal with them. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I love that you see civil society as allies, right? And as the connection to the communities, which is true. Because if in the end, the people that you want to assist, the climate vulnerable populations, are not on board with your program, well, then you're not going to serve them, right? So everybody really needs to keep the needs of the end target group in mind, and it's easier if you have the representatives of them in the room. Now I have another question to you, and then I also want to open the floor to any questions from the audience, because I know sometimes there's some confusion with the Global Shield. What are they doing? What is happening? Is there something happening like behind the scenes? So we still have 20 minutes, and if you have any questions, I'm sure we will be happy to answer. But Avina, I need some advice from you. Ghana was quite responsive to civil society engagement, but the in-country process is a country-driven process, right? So ideally the Ministry of Finance would nominate a focal point that then organizes, with assistance from the Global Shield Secretariat, these workshops, this outreach. So if there would be a government that's not as responsive to civil society, to the inclusion of it like Ghana, from a government perspective, how could the civil society make themselves heard or get themselves into the space if it doesn't come from the government themselves?
Well, my thoughts are, if it doesn't come from the government, then it must come from the people. So it would be up to civil society to work with the people to ask for what they think will help them overcome their challenges. So instead of waiting for the solutions, well, in our case, the solutions have been identified and the request has been put in. In the case where you don't have that opportunity, civil society, understanding what, for example, the Global Shield has to offer and the benefits of pre-arranged and trigger-based financing, can start to engage the communities and provide examples of communities that have benefited from these initiatives. And then the communities would ask of their local representatives to ensure that they can have access to similar mechanisms, is what I think would be the other way to do it.
Thank you very much. That's good advice. If it doesn't come from the government, the people have to push for it, right? Upsala. Is there a question from the audience to the representatives here on the panel? Not yet, but maybe, yes. Can you come up here because I have this cable?
Hi, I'm Arvin Caro. I'm from Start Network, particularly working in the Philippines. I just wanted to ask, in terms of the Global Shield with the first cohort of countries, is there already some sort of monitoring or a way for civil society and NGOs to look at which point or at which I noticed earlier you mentioned about a timeline of different steps. For the different countries, where are they in these different steps that the Global Shield is looking at? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Jennifer, I think this is to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. So the Global Shield does cooperate together with the MAPS program. And in this sense, it's very nice to work together with them, as there's already some point of engagement when thinking about preparing civil society organizations to prepare in the Global Shield. In the case where the MAPS, the multi-actor partnership, is not active, Basically, by signing up for the Global Shield country communities, what we would do is then start informing the members when we kick off in the country. We don't want to do pre-engagement in case the process takes a long time to get started in the country. So once the government officially decides to start the process, we would then inform everyone that is kicking off and inform them about what the next steps and timelines will be. At this point in time, we would then invite them to start contributing to the stock take. So informing us about what's happening already in the country. What are civil society organizations already working on? This includes in topics related to CDRFI tangentially, so maybe on disaster risk reduction, disaster risk management, climate change adaptation. These are all very good linkage points that are important to bring into the Global Shield process to see if CDRFI could be used to enhance some of this work. And then as we progress forward, we would always make sure to share these publications publicly and with the Global Shield community so that everybody's aware of what's happening. Maybe at some point you see something's missing and then we can work back and amend that. And then as the next step, we go into the gap analysis, where it's also very important to identify and get the perspectives from the civil society organizations about what type of support is lacking in the country, which groups are not being protected. The point from Kairos about the informal sector, this often isn't in the forefront of people's minds and is crucially important to including if we're really going to make sure that these products and instruments really reach and target the most vulnerable. And we'll also work together then with the governments. It's a country-led process. So fortunately, in the case of Ghana, it was really great to see their leadership in making sure that civil society organizations were part of every step of this process. And from our side too, as a secretariat, we will work to facilitate and make the process as inclusive a process as possible, following the lead of the government here. And then through this process, we really want to bring in then these voices when the government goes forward with creating their request for support, so that these other smaller aspects, thinking not only about the instrument, but about the distribution channel that will be needed, or the additional data that might be needed for certain groups in order to identify what's needed, can also be brought into consideration for the government's request for support.
Thank you, Jennifer. I think there was this, when can the civil society contribute? But I think the gentleman had a second question, which is basically where the countries are in the steps. So we have I believe, 8 Pathfinder countries in the Pacific as a region. So where do they stand in the Global Shield process?
Yeah, happy to provide a quick overview here. So we were very happy just earlier last week on December 2nd to hear that Ghana has officially submitted the request for CDRFI support. Here we were able to move quite quickly, as Abena already mentioned, just kicking off in July and going through the 6-month process. We have also been in active discussions with the Pacific region as well as with Senegal, and the first kickoff workshop has already taken place in Pakistan. And with some of the other Pathfinder countries, then what we're waiting is for the government to signal their readiness to kick off the process there. So basically, work has already been happening in 4+ countries, and for some of the remaining Pathfinder countries will hopefully be developing over the next couple of months.
Thank you very much. That's great. Are there any other questions? No? Yes. Start Network. Can you pose your question here? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. This is Anna from Star Network. I just want to ask about the second cohort of countries. Did you decide for a different process for them to be selected? Are you expecting a more like a sort of an application-based format rather than choosing the countries? So do you expect something more on a voluntary basis of countries coming to you and apply to be part of this process, and how would it work? Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for this question, and a very exciting one too, I think. Basically, in 2024, we are hoping to expand the Global Shield to more countries, and basically, it will work through an announcement and a call for collecting expressions of interest from countries. Um, this likely will be a 3-month process once we make the official announcement. And then what we would expect is to receive this expression of interest from the government. Ideally, the Ministry of Finance or Economy is also part of this process, but other ministries can also be part of this overall process. And we would ask them to submit this letter, this expression of interest, to the Global Shield Secretariat. The next step would be on the Global Shield website, there's a country prioritization framework where we take into account what are the risks and hazards affecting the country, what type of support and financial instruments are already being used, and what is the country's readiness for becoming part of the Global Shield. And so if anyone's interested in learning about this, please feel free to check out the website. I can also send you the link. It's called the Country Prioritization Framework. For the next cohort, we do aim to make it a fair and transparent process where the selection is based on this criteria, and we do aim to have a variation in terms of countries from different regions around the world. But basically, this framework would then determine how the countries are selected.
Thank you, Jennifer. So the Ministry of Finance or other ministry need to send this expression of interest to Global Shield Secretariat to be then considered under this framework that's on the website. So the ministry has to send a letter, but if they don't do it by themselves, there are basically the Global Shield funds that have been pledged, and luckily there's also some more pledges come in now at COP28. So the civil society can also push their governments to apply for these fundings, right? Would you think this is a recommendation towards the civil society? For example, Start Network, we need all hands on deck, basically, of the NGOs that are not afraid of finance, and you are one of them, and you have all these partners in the countries that can also push for the governments to start moving. Would you think this is a role for the civil society to start to push for the application for Global Shield money?
Yeah. So from our perspective, it's really great to see this push coming from civil society organizations on the need for climate and disaster risk financing. It's been really amazing to see, exactly as Kairos and Joy was expressing in the beginning when talking about financial instruments and whether these are really the appropriate tools to be using for dealing with the impacts of climate risk. There was a lot of resistance. And so seeing civil society organizations actually taking an active role in recognizing how these instruments could be helpful, and as Abena was pointing out, speaking with the local representatives to bring these perspectives into the government are very helpful, and I think can really encourage the government to then make the right decision. And so the more civil society organizations bring up their desire and willingness to participate here, as well as their need for these instruments to help manage these impacts, I think the more the governments will start to recognize that this is something that could really benefit their country, and hopefully encourage them to submit their official expression of interest.
Great. So like Kairos was saying, sometimes the civil society can push, and if it's just a conversation to get the process going, that can lead to something bigger. Joy, do you want to respond to that? Wait.
I just want to make one point, that civil society's role should not end when the in-country process concludes, right? It's very important because we believe that we have a major role to play in terms of selecting the particular area, geographic location, community, and even in terms of selecting the community participants and delivering the funds in kinds, cash. So this is very important to maintain transparency and accountability, and also to maintain civil society, government, Global Shield, or whatever the global entity is. This kind of a whole of society approach. It's not about only government, only Global Shield, or only civil society's role. And when you do not have shared responsibility, there is high chance that it will go haywire. So that's the one point I want to make. Thanks.
Any other questions? Because otherwise I have a question to Kairos and Joy. So Avena was telling how, and Jennifer, how in Ghana there were 2 stakeholder workshops, and in between there were some informal online consultation of civil society. Is this correct? Right. So if in your country the process starts off, do you have like a grand vision? What would you recommend to your focal point? Is this like a good approach? I mean, Ghana is really experimental, and they, like the civil society came to the workshops. Would you have any additions? Would you want anything else that we can recommend here to Global Shield to then, I mean, we can only recommend to the focal points to do it, right? But to heavily recommend any additional, anything additional?
Well, in Bangladesh, and we would start from subnational level. It will not be started at the national level, ideally, and we are interested to take it forward. However, it's important that we listen to the people who are most affected. That's why we will start at the subnational level, and then from regional to government level. And there is another thing is that since Bangladesh is already contemplating its own national loss and damage mechanism, it's very important that we align with that. It's very important, and the instruments should also be in alignment. And otherwise, there will be kind of overlapping, and also the chance of confusion that what is this particular money coming from. So it should be an overall mechanism. The source of fund and instruments could be different, but that it should function in one mechanism nationally. The international source of fund can be different, and even nationally, the source of fund can be different. But it should, operate in an overarching mechanism to avoid all sorts of confusion. So, and I would actually suggest that there are more civil society dialogue than what we had in Ghana. I congratulate them. Of course, it worked. However, we think that we need more of those in Bangladesh.
Okay. Thank you, Joy, for answering first and giving me time to collect my thoughts. Uh, yeah, I think, I mean, for the Philippines, we basically, if I would get my wishes to become true, I would have 3 wishes as well. First is that our focal point would not try to reinvent the wheel. I think things are working long before the Global Shield was created, long before CDRFI was coined as the next, big thing in terms of managing risks. In the Philippines, and my colleague, for example, Danica is leading that. We've been doing stakeholder consultations beyond civil society organizations, and in one of the conversations we had with the academics, with local academic institutions, the Philippines already have our own version of risk management that has been in place for many years, like indigenous type of sharing and transferring risk. So if we can build on those experiences, then maybe our work would be more applicable. It would be more appreciated as well by those who would, benefit from having a proper CDRFI instrument in place in the country. So that's first. Avoid reinventing the wheel. The next point is, I think the government should disabuse immediately, disabuse ourselves of having the false dichotomies around CDRFI discussion. And maybe a lot of you would disagree, but for example, in the Philippines, the difference between, for example, having a loss and damage fund and CDRFI is becoming a point of debates even among civil society organizations. And as ICSC, what we keep on saying is that we feel like this is something equivalent to us shooting ourselves on the foot, because you don't have to choose, right? And ultimately, a farmer won't say, I can sleep better at night because I have access to CDRFI, or I can sleep better at night because I know that the loss and damage fund can cover whatever my losses would be. It's about development. It's about making sure that people live with dignity. And I think the country focal point should approach that issue head on. Like this abuse of the whole conversation about this like false dichotomies. And the last point is that the focal person, the focal point should focus on ensuring that the process is inclusive as much as possible. Of course, civil society organizations would have, we can make noise if we want to. But I think we're not the only major stakeholder that should be engaged in the process. I think academic institutions, even in the Philippines, we have a lot of like village financial actors, like pawn shops and so, which are willing and would want to take on CDRFI because they have the highest, I think, penetration rate in terms of the far-flung areas. They should be part of the conversation. Local academic institutions who have the risk profiles of our islands, which we have 7,000 of them. They have the risk profile, so you don't have to start from scratch, right? So having an inclusive process, of course, it's a wish, as asked by Magdalena, but I think it's something that we should aspire for, not only for the Philippines, but for the rest of the Pathfinder countries.
Great, Kairos, love it. So we don't reinvent the wheel. We take from what's there, also like nationally, locally owned approaches. We shouldn't shoot ourselves in the foot, and I love this. I think last year we had lots of confusion. Loss and damage fund is the Global Shield, the loss and damage fund. Now we had the whole year of the TC. I think things are more clear now. We have the loss and damage fund now also operationalized. We have the loss and damage funding arrangement where the Global Shield is in. Now there's still confusion, of course, for the Global Shield to sort out how the funding arrangements and the fund work together, but it's clear that the Global Shield should and can coordinate very closely with the fund. But for the civil society or actors in the country, if there's funding, go for it, right? We shouldn't have either one or the other, but like combine them as much and as like cohesive as we can, and then be really inclusive, right? I like that you mentioned local academic institutions. I can also think, for example, of the local private sector that should really be involved in this, and also cities, subnational governments, those who really have to bear the risks and are usually the first responders. So maybe next time when we hopefully have results already from more Pathfinder countries, we also call I think this is going to be a yearly event, non-state stakeholders in the Global Shield, right? To broaden the scope from the civil society to actually the multi-actor partnership. Right, so we are right on time. Thank you very much for your questions. I also call on all the civil society who is in the room to also get involved. Please approach me or Jennifer. We're happy to have conversations, to explain, to get you involved. And to my fantastic panelists, Abena, Jennifer, Joy, and Kairos, for joining me here. And now have a good evening, everybody. Thank you very much.